Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Friday Fragments, which is a weekly meme hosted by James over at booksheetclub.blogspot.com. Today I'm going to read to you a book on my Nook. This is its pretty cover, and this is the Nook. The book I am going to read to you is 10 Ways to be Adored When Romancing a Lord by Sarah MacLean, which is the second book in her most recent adult trilogy. In this book, the main character is Nick St. John, who is the brother of the main male character in 9 Rules to Break When Romancing a Rake. And shortly before this book started, he was just named one of London's most eligible bachelors. And so he's kind of escaped the city, and he's currently in Yorkshire. And he's met this woman named Isabel, and their first meeting was quite interesting. And this is the part that I'm going to read to you is actually their second meeting, which I think is equally fun. So, here we go. You realize we look like fools, Rock said dryly, leading his horse to the edge of the drive, where he could lean against the side of the wide stone steps to the door of the house. The black seemed to sense his master's disapproval, pawing at the ground once with an impatient snort. We cannot look like fools if we do not have an audience to label us as such. She did not want us here today. She likely doesn't have servants posted. Rock leveled Nick with a frank look. I see that your insistence upon saving women who are capable of taking care of themselves remains fully intact. Nick ignored the words, tossing his reins to the Turk and started up the stairs 2 steps at a time. What do you mean to do? Nick turned from his position in front of the wide oak door with a wry smile. Why, I mean to do what any good gentleman would do in this situation. I mean to knock. Rock crossed his arms over his chest. This should be entertaining, if nothing else. Nick raised the large metal door knocker and let it fall with an ominous clang, trying to recall the last time he had used a door knocker. Before he could entertain the question, however, the door opened. For a brief moment, Nick thought it had done so on its own, until he looked down into a set of familiar brown eyes set in the face of a young boy. A young boy with a face covered in what looked suspiciously like strawberry jam. Nick was not entirely certain how to proceed under such circumstances, but before he could say anything at all, the child took matters into his own hands. The door slammed shut as quickly as it opened. "There's a man at the door!" The screech was loud enough to carry clearly through the thick oak, and Nick, surprised, turned to look back at Rock to confirm that it had all taken place as he had thought. His friend was quaking with deep, rumbling laughter. "I see you are going to be great help." With a final chuckle, Rock raised one hand in solidarity. "I assure you, once you have breached the castle defenses, I shall throw my full support behind you." Nick turned back to the door, and after a long moment of consideration, pressed his ear to the oak, as though he might be able to hear what was going on behind it. Rock let out a bark of laughter at the action, and Nick waved him silent, almost positive he could hear frenzied whispers coming from inside the house. Stepping back, he reached once more for the knocker, but was interrupted before he could use it. "My lord?" He turned to find a tall, lanky boy in wool breeches, white shirt sleeves, and a dirty green waistcoat, turning the corner from the side of the house. The boy wore a cap low on his brow, and Nick had a brief moment of questioning why the servant had not removed the hat before he realized that nothing about the estate seemed to operate normally. "We are here at the invitation of Lady Isabel." The boy had reached the foot of the steps, and he paused. "Weren't you supposed to come tomorrow?" Ignoring the insolent behavior, when had he ever been questioned by a servant, Nick replied. "We are here now." "You won't find her inside." "Is she not at home?" The boy leaned back on his heels, considering his words. "She is at home, but not inside." Nick began to feel his temper fray. "Boy, I am not interested in playing games. Is your lady in or not?" The servant smiled, then, a wide grin that seemed entirely unservantly. "She is not in. She is out. On top of, more like," the boy pointed up. "She is on the roof." "She is on the roof?" Surely Nick had misunderstood. "Just so," the groom said. "Should I call her?" The question was so bizarre that it took Nick several seconds to process its meaning. Not so Rock. Unable to contain his own wide smile, the Turk said, "Yes, please. We should very much like you to call her." The boy stepped back to the opposite side of the drive, cupped his hands around his mouth, and called, "Lady Isabel, you have visitors." Nick stepped back from the house himself then, Rock at his side, horses in tow. He stared upward, uncertain of what might come next, unwilling to accept the possibility that the lady he had met earlier in the day would have any reason to be up on the roof of her ancestral home, 3 stories above the ground. far above, a head poked over the edge of the house. It seemed Lady Isabel was indeed on the roof. Dear God, the woman had a death wish. The head disappeared for a moment, and Nick wondered if perhaps he was hallucinating. When it reappeared, he found himself disappointed that the whole afternoon was not a figment of his imagination. You were not supposed to arrive until tomorrow. The words carried down to him. I am not receiving. Rock gave a little bark of laughter and offered, It appears we have found a woman who does not consider you so irresistible. Nick cast a sidelong glance in the direction of his friend. You are not helping. Turning resolutely away from Rock, he called up, Seems a good thing I came today, Lady Isabel. It appears you may need saving again. The smile she offered was angelic, and entirely false. I have survived 24 years without a keeper, my lord. I need not acquire one here today. He had an intense desire to fetch the infuriating woman down and show her precisely how dire her need for a keeper was. The thought had barely formed in his mind before it was chased away by a vision of the soft, beautiful woman in his arms that afternoon, entirely at his mercy. He pushed the image away. There was nothing about this woman that was at his whim. Considering you were nearly run down this morning, and you are dangerously close to toppling off your roof now, forgive me if I do not share your certainty. I was nowhere near the edge before you arrived, Lord Nicholas. Should I fall, it will be entirely on your head. She cocked her head thoughtfully. Perhaps, quite literally. She disappeared again, and the groom Nick gave him a look of lordly disdain, which in no way served to intimidate the insolent pup. Rock laughed again, tossing the reins of both horses to the boy. You might as well take them. I think we might be here a while. The servant did not move, too fascinated by the unfolding scene to leave. Nick turned a scowl on his friend. The woman had tried the patience of a saint. Do you think that she has forgotten that it was she who invited me to this damned house? She peeked over her head over the edge of the house once more. You would do well to remember that sound carries up, my lord. Language, please. My apologies. He offered an exaggerated bow. I am not used to conversing with ladies on roofs. The rules of etiquette for this situation have escaped me. She narrowed her gaze on him. Even from 3 stories up, I can tell that you are being facetious. He ignored that. Perhaps you would like to tell us why you are on your roof? I am learning, she said, as though it was a perfectly normal response. Learning to nearly kill yourself again? How many times am I going to have to tell you that I did not nearly kill myself? I stand corrected. Again. What are you learning? The fundamentals of roof repair. Fascinating, really. She smiled again. This time she meant it. He sucked in a breath. Would she ever get used to her smiles? Roof repair? I beg your pardon. Did you say you're repairing the roof? Well, it certainly will not repair itself, my lord. Lovely or not, she was mad. It was the only answer. He looked at Rock, who was smiling like a buffoon. She has a point, Nick. And her madness was clearly infectious. Lady Isabel, I must insist that you come down. She watched him for a long moment, as though assessing the likelihood of his leaving the estate, and remained roof-bound. I should very like to see your marbles, and will be happy to value them. I should think you would find my offer generous enough to accept. She looked at Rock, then to the stable boy, before heaving an impressive sigh. Very well, I shall come down. Nick could not help but the wave of triumph that coursed through him at the words. He had restored normalcy to this tiny corner of Britain, at least for as long as it would take for her to concoct her next mad scheme. And so that is a little segment of 10 Ways to be Adored When Romancing a Lord. If you want to read it now, you can do so via netgalley.com, or you can wait for it till it's out in stores, which is at the end of October, the 26th, I believe. But so far, it's a very entertaining read, and I highly suggest it, as well as its first book, 9 Rules to Break When Romancing Greek. That's all for this week. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week.